Oh, I was there. Hated the day. The day was a miserable day. I mean, it was a
Really? I thought.
well, was it? Well, I can tell you now. It was the worst royal engagement I ever did. A royal wedding I ever did. You know, I thought to myself, you know, this is all showbiz rubbish.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what I discovered was, of course, that she was hunting for a man and there's no doubt she targeted Harry.
The whole thing was just stage managed to suit them.
This is not the Harry he was a few years ago. And the only reason he's not like that is he's following the requests of Meghan. He said himself, what Meghan wants, Meghan gets.
And so he was angry, and I felt, you know.
For years, California had represented freedom, reinvention, and the promise of a life beyond palace control. But behind the guarded gates, a different reality was allegedly taking shape, one filled with unanswered calls, disappearing allies, and a private conversation that would quietly begin planning their escape. From the outside, Harry and Meghan appeared to have achieved what they had once demanded so fiercely: distance, independence, and control over their own future. California was not supposed to be merely another address. It was meant to be the ultimate answer to every warning issued by palace officials and every critic who claimed they could not succeed beyond the monarchy. Here, they could speak without royal permission, create without institutional limits, and raise their children far from the traditions that had governed Harry's life since birth. At first, the promise felt real. New partnerships were discussed. Influential names entered their circle. Their story carried enormous value, and their departure from royal life seemed to give them a power few public figures possessed. They were no longer waiting for the palace to decide where they stood. They were building something entirely their own. But success in California came with a cruel condition. Attention had to become momentum, and momentum had to produce lasting influence. Slowly, the atmosphere allegedly began to change. Calls that once came quickly were delayed. Meetings became harder to arrange. Invitations that had once seemed automatic stopped arriving. People who had openly supported them became quieter, more distant, and far more careful about being seen too close to their increasingly controversial story. Meghan reportedly tried to treat the shift as normal. Hollywood was unpredictable, she argued. Projects changed, executives moved on, and powerful relationships often cooled before returning. Showing concern would only make the situation appear worse. Confidence had always been one of her strongest defenses, and she was not prepared to let uncertainty destroy the life they had fought to create. Harry, however, allegedly heard something darker in the silence. California had freed him from royal control, but it had also removed the structure that had surrounded him for most of his life. The monarchy had been restrictive, yet it was stable. It provided security, identity, and a permanent place in a system that existed beyond individual success or failure. In Hollywood, everything seemed dependent on relevance, public interest, and the loyalty of people who could vanish without warning. That was when the first private conversation allegedly began. It was not called an exit plan. Not yet. It was described as preparation, an emergency option in case the California chapter could no longer support their ambitions or protect their family. Other locations were quietly considered. Finances were reviewed. Security questions were raised. And once advisors became involved, the secret no longer belonged only to Harry and Meghan. Their deepest fear was no longer simply that Hollywood might reject them. It was that leaving California would allow the world to declare their entire post-royal dream a failure. But the anxiety inside their home did not begin with one cancelled opportunity or one unanswered message. It began when the powerful Hollywood circle that had once welcomed them started closing its doors without explanation. There was no dramatic announcement, no public feud, and no single moment Meghan could confront. Instead, support allegedly disappeared one invitation at a time, leaving Harry and Meghan trapped in a far more dangerous Hollywood punishment, the kind delivered through silence, distance, and doors that simply stopped opening. Hollywood rarely rejects people in public. Its power is quieter than that. A message goes unanswered. A meeting is postponed without a new date. An invitation that once seemed guaranteed never arrives. Representatives who had sounded enthusiastic suddenly become difficult to reach. Nothing appears final, yet the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. When Harry and Meghan first arrived in California, the mood had been entirely different. Their royal connection made them fascinating to producers, executives, celebrities, and major donors. They carried global recognition, personal controversy, and access to a story the world still wanted to hear. Many believed they could turn their departure from royal life into a lasting media empire built around documentaries, speeches, charitable work, and carefully controlled revelations. But curiosity has a short life in Hollywood. The industry wants a story that can grow, not one that remains trapped in the same conflict. Slowly, some insiders allegedly began worrying that the Sussex brand had become too dependent on royal tension. Every partnership risked being overshadowed by another family dispute, another palace response, or another argument over what had happened behind closed doors. Meghan reportedly wanted to break free from that limitation. She pushed for work that would establish her as a serious creator, business figure, and independent voice. Yet decision-makers kept returning to the same subject, the monarchy. They wanted the royal connection even as they feared the controversy surrounding it. That contradiction left her in a difficult position. The very story that opened Hollywood's doors was now preventing her from moving beyond them. Harry was even less comfortable with the calculation behind it all. He wanted their work to create purpose and security. But he struggled with a world where loyalty could disappear as quickly as public interest. In royal life, relationships were often formal and restrictive. In Hollywood, they appeared warm until the commercial value changed. Some prominent acquaintances allegedly became more cautious. A private conversation, a disagreement, or even a casual dinner could become part of an international narrative. Distance became safer than friendship. Inside the couple's advisory circle, the disagreement deepened. Some urged them to reduce royal commentary and rebuild slowly. Others warned that without the royal story, their strongest commercial advantage might vanish. Soon, Harry and Meghan allegedly began noticing who still returned calls, who offered introductions, and who had quietly disappeared. Their social world became a painful map of declining influence. That was when advisors reportedly created a confidential planning document, warning that California might no longer offer the stability their future required. As Hollywood's silence became impossible to dismiss, one question began following Harry and Meghan through every private meeting. If California could no longer protect their future, where could they go without appearing to retreat? Harry allegedly saw the warning signs before Meghan was willing to name them. To him, California was becoming uncertain. To her, leaving too soon would hand victory to every critic who predicted their failure, and that disagreement transformed a practical decision into a deeply personal battle over pride, survival, and identity. For Harry, the problem was no longer limited to fading invitations or uncertain projects. He allegedly feared that his family's financial security, emotional stability, and future plans were tied to a world neither he nor Meghan could control. Hollywood could offer enormous opportunity, but it offered no permanence. Interest could disappear overnight, leaving them exposed to the same public judgment they had crossed an ocean to escape. Instability carried a deeper meaning for Harry. His childhood had been shaped by sudden upheaval, family scandal, and decisions made by powerful people behind closed doors. His private life had repeatedly changed without his permission. Now, every postponed meeting and abandoned conversation allegedly awakened an old fear, that the ground beneath him could shift before he had time to protect those closest to him. Meghan reportedly saw the danger differently. Leaving under pressure would not look like strategy, she believed. It would look like surrender. Critics who had predicted their failure would claim victory, and every sacrifice made in pursuit of independence would be reduced to a humiliating retreat. This was not simply a battle between husband and wife. Both wanted safety for their children. They disagreed over what safety required. Harry increasingly believed it meant changing direction before the situation worsened. Meghan believed it meant refusing to be pushed from the future they had publicly promised to build. Even the language of a possible move became dangerous. It could be called expansion, privacy, family necessity, or a new business chapter. But they allegedly knew the headlines would use a harsher word, escape. Harry also began missing parts of royal life he had once rejected: the dependable security, familiar residences, trusted routines, and certainty of belonging to something larger than commercial success. Yet for Meghan, moving closer to Britain risked returning to a system she believed had restricted her voice and reduced her independence. Several alternatives were quietly discussed: another American base, Canada, a temporary European home, or a more private international location. Harry reportedly considered what distance from Britain might mean for his children, and whether they would grow up disconnected from their royal inheritance and family history. Eventually, Meghan agreed to examine a relocation strategy, but only if it was presented as global expansion rather than retreat. An advisor was allegedly instructed to prepare a restricted file containing destination choices, financial projections, schooling options, security risks, and language for a future announcement. That compromise was supposed to remain buried inside a confidential strategy file, but when fragments of the document allegedly reached outside hands, the couple's private uncertainty became the foundation of a far more explosive story. The document was never meant to be seen outside a tightly controlled circle. Yet its alleged contents revealed something far more advanced than casual relocation discussions, timelines, destination rankings, financial safeguards, and a carefully designed public narrative intended to disguise what insiders privately called the California exit plan. According to the alleged leak, the material came from a confidential planning file prepared for only a small group of advisors surrounding Harry and Meghan. It did not announce an immediate departure. That would have been too obvious, too risky, and too damaging. Instead, it reportedly described a phased strategy designed to weaken their dependence on California without allowing the public to see the change as a retreat. The first stage was said to be almost invisible. Expensive obligations would be reviewed. Staffing needs would be reconsidered. Business partnerships would be examined one by one to determine which could survive beyond California and which depended entirely on their physical presence inside Hollywood's powerful social network. Nothing would be abandoned suddenly. Everything would be reduced carefully. The second stage was far more revealing. Harry and Meghan would allegedly establish a temporary or secondary residence elsewhere while continuing to describe California as their principal home. This would allow them to test another location without triggering immediate headlines about failure. Canada reportedly appeared among the leading possibilities. It carried emotional history as the place connected to their first break from royal life, while offering relative access to both the United States and Britain. A European base was also discussed, close enough for royal relatives, charitable appearances, and international opportunities, yet distant enough to avoid a full return to the United Kingdom. The plan allegedly allowed Meghan to maintain a smaller California presence for entertainment and business commitments while the family spent increasing periods elsewhere. Even the language had been prepared. International expansion, family transition, and new global chapter were reportedly considered safer than relocation, withdrawal, or escape. But the practical dangers were enormous. Security would have to be rebuilt around new travel routes, residences, schools, local laws, and changing levels of public exposure. Financially, the move might reduce certain costs, yet it could also alarm potential partners already questioning whether the couple's commercial future remained stable. Harry allegedly preferred a location that would place his children closer to their royal family, even without a formal reconciliation. Meghan, however, reportedly insisted that no destination could return them to palace control or suggest that they were asking the monarchy to rescue them. Then came the most damaging detail: the proposed timeline. Meaningful changes could allegedly begin far sooner than anyone expected. And one condition would accelerate everything immediately: a further collapse in Hollywood support or the loss of another major commercial relationship. The leaked file proved that an exit strategy existed, but it did not explain why the timeline had suddenly become urgent, and the answer lay in a series of Hollywood decisions that allegedly changed the couple's position almost overnight. The California exit plan might have remained nothing more than a private safeguard until one anticipated opportunity allegedly vanished at the worst possible moment. What followed was not simply a professional disappointment, but a chain reaction that exposed how much of Harry and Meghan's future depended on Hollywood continuing to believe in them. For months, the project had allegedly been discussed in strict confidence. It was ambitious, high-profile, and designed to prove that Harry and Meghan could create something powerful beyond royal interviews, family accusations, and personal revelations. The money mattered, but credibility mattered more. Success would have shown Hollywood that their influence could survive without constant connection to the monarchy. At first, the signs appeared promising. Meetings were productive. Ideas were exchanged. Advisors began preparing for what they believed could become a defining new chapter. Then, the tone reportedly changed. Conversations were delayed. Expectations were quietly reduced. Messages became shorter. Meetings were postponed without firm replacements. No one openly declared that confidence had disappeared, yet enthusiasm was clearly fading. Finally, the opportunity was allegedly withdrawn through a carefully worded refusal that left no public conflict to challenge and no obvious decision-maker to confront. Meghan's reaction was said to be controlled, but the disappointment cut deeply. She allegedly viewed the collapse as another example of powerful institutions welcoming her influence when it was valuable, then retreating when controversy became uncomfortable. She refused to show panic. Privately, however, the decision reportedly felt like a rejection not only of the project, but of the independent identity she had worked to build. Harry reacted with less restraint. If one promising agreement could disappear after months of preparation, how many others might follow? What would happen if royal tensions intensified again? Or if public interest shifted toward a newer story? Then, more warnings arrived. Other relationships were allegedly weakening. Supporters who had once offered introductions became cautious. Some feared market fatigue. Others questioned audience demand or worried that the Sussex name had become too unpredictable. A few reportedly resented how private loyalty repeatedly pulled them close to public controversy. Advisors delivered a brutal assessment. The couple needed a major success quickly. Or they needed a controlled reset before the story of collapse became permanent. That warning activated the hidden plan. Property reviews, schooling possibilities, security reports, and international residency options were allegedly moved forward. Harry and Meghan were no longer considering a holiday home or a temporary escape. According to the dramatized leak, they were preparing to reduce California's role as the permanent center of their family and public lives. The transition would happen slowly. They could continue denying a complete departure while spending longer periods elsewhere until the move became too advanced to reverse. But by then, the leak had already reached royal circles, where Harry's possible return was viewed not as a homecoming, but as a threat filled with unanswered demands. Yet the most dangerous reaction did not come from Hollywood or the American press, it came from inside the royal system, where Harry's possible return threatened to reopen questions the palace believed had already been sealed. When whispers of the exit plan allegedly reached royal advisors, There was no celebration and no immediate offer of reconciliation. Instead, palace officials began asking a colder question. If Harry moved closer to Britain, would he return as a son seeking family or as a public figure expecting royal protection and influence? The manner in which the palace learned of the plan reportedly deepened the suspicion. Harry had not called his father. No private request had been made. The information arrived through indirect channels, mixed with fragments of the leaked document and warnings that the Sussexes were already exploring life beyond California. To royal advisors, that silence mattered. It suggested either that the plan remained uncertain or that Harry and Meghan intended to control the timing before the monarchy could respond. Inside the institution, a sharp distinction was allegedly drawn. A family moving closer to Britain was one thing. A couple seeking a semi-royal position without returning to official duty or accepting palace discipline was something entirely different. For Charles, the issue carried a private ache. As a father, he may have wanted greater access to Harry and his grandchildren. As monarch, however, he could not allow personal longing to weaken rules designed to protect the crown. Even a quiet invitation could be interpreted as forgiveness, rehabilitation, or the beginning of an official return. William was reportedly more cautious. Physical proximity, he feared, could create pressure for shared appearances, security arrangements, ceremonial access, and carefully managed images of reconciliation. Meghan's possible return to Europe made the situation even more sensitive. Palace officials allegedly believed that every conversation, meeting, or family gesture could become an international event, with consequences no one could fully control. Harry's position remained painfully unresolved. He wanted family connection without surrendering independence. The palace, however, allegedly believed that trust, access, and royal standing could not be separated whenever convenient. The conflict extended beyond money. It touched inheritance in its deepest form: family objects, private archives, historic residences, traditions, memories, and the royal identity Harry wanted his children to understand. Yet access to that world would reportedly come with conditions. There would be no automatic public role, no guarantee of royal security, no use of private family meetings for commercial storytelling. Above all, there would be no negotiated half-return built around personal branding. Charles allegedly considered whether a private family arrangement could still be created, but advisors warned that compassion could quickly become precedent. Others saw the leak as leverage. With Hollywood support weakening, they believed the palace now held greater power to set the terms of any future contact. When Meghan reportedly learned that conditions were being discussed before Harry had even approached the family, her fear hardened. To her, the exit plan was beginning to look less like freedom and more like a road back toward the very control they had escaped. With Hollywood withdrawing and the palace quietly setting boundaries, Harry and Meghan now faced a choice more painful than relocation itself. Which part of their identity were they willing to sacrifice to secure the future? Meghan allegedly refused to let a leaked document, fading Hollywood loyalty, or palace conditions define the next chapter of her family's life. But her countermove required Harry to make a choice he had avoided for years, whether his future depended on protecting their independence or rebuilding what remained of his royal past. Meghan's response was not to retreat quietly. According to the alleged strategy, she wanted to transform the threatened departure into something larger and more ambitious. The move would be presented as international expansion, supported by new charitable projects, media ventures, and business opportunities beyond California. They would not appear to be running from Hollywood. They would claim to be outgrowing it. She reportedly pushed for an announcement before critics could take control of the story. Silence, in her view, would look like fear. Delay would allow every cancelled meeting and weakening relationship to be presented as proof that the Sussex experiment had failed. By keeping a California base while establishing a second center of operations abroad, Meghan believed they could present movement as growth rather than withdrawal. Harry allegedly feared the opposite. Another polished announcement might protect their image for a moment, but it could also deepen public suspicion. More importantly, it could make any private approach to his family appear calculated before it had even begun. Their disagreement carried years of unresolved tension. Meghan believed survival depended on controlling the narrative before others weaponized it. Harry was beginning to wonder whether peace required leaving the narrative behind entirely. The most painful argument reportedly involved their children. Meghan wanted them protected from royal pressure, inherited conflict, and the traditions that had caused so much private pain. Harry feared something different. That distance was separating them from their family history, their relatives, and a royal identity they might one day wish to understand. Then Harry learned that palace advisors were allegedly discussing his possible return as an institutional risk rather than a family matter. That knowledge pushed him toward a breaking point. He had become trapped between two worlds, too royal to be treated as an ordinary Hollywood figure, yet too estranged to return easily to the institution that had shaped him. For the first time, Harry allegedly considered contacting Charles directly. No advisors, no publicists, no advance conditions. Meghan feared such a move could divide them. The palace might welcome Harry privately, while continuing to treat her as an outside complication. A personal appeal could weaken their shared position before any future arrangement had been secured. At the same time, distrust spread through their advisory circle. Who had seen the confidential file? Who gained from exposing it? The couple reportedly began to suspect that the leak had come not from royal circles, but from someone connected to their professional world. Someone close enough to know that Hollywood support was already collapsing. Harry prepared to act without knowing whether Meghan would stand behind him, and without knowing whether his father would answer. The final decision would not be announced on a stage or settled inside a palace meeting. It would emerge through one private contact that could either reopen the royal door or close it permanently. By the time Harry allegedly made the call, the California dream had already changed beyond recognition. What began as a declaration of freedom had become a struggle for stability, belonging, and control, and the voice waiting on the other end could determine whether their next move looked like reinvention or surrender. Harry reportedly avoided official representatives and contacted Charles through a private channel. He knew that once advisors became involved, a family conversation could quickly turn into a negotiation over titles, duties, security, and public appearances. He did not ask for money, a royal position, or public rehabilitation. Instead, Harry allegedly asked whether a path still existed for rebuilding private family contact if he, Meghan, and their children moved closer to Britain. Charles was said to be deeply affected, but cautious. The possibility of seeing his son and grandchildren more often carried emotional weight. Yet every private promise could create public consequences. Rather than offering immediate reassurance, he allegedly asked Harry to separate three issues that had become dangerously entangled: family contact, official duties, and security. The message was clear. Moving closer would not restore the life Harry once knew. The monarchy had changed. Relationships had hardened. Trust could not be rebuilt through distance alone. When Harry shared the conversation, Meghan reportedly felt both relief and suspicion. No demand had been made for her submission to palace authority. Still, she feared that quiet conditions could slowly become restrictions, pulling them back toward the system they had fought to escape. The California exit plan therefore remained active, but flexible. The couple allegedly intended to reduce their dependence on Hollywood, establish a meaningful base elsewhere, and keep California as only one part of a wider arrangement. The cost would be severe. Property uncertainty, professional restructuring, damaged friendships, security complications, and public humiliation would follow them. Hollywood had not abandoned them completely, but confidence had weakened enough to force a painful reassessment of their entire post-royal future. Meanwhile, advisors allegedly traced the leak to a former professional connection who had seen fragments of the planning process. The motive remained uncertain: revenge, self-protection, financial gain, or an attempt to force the couple into action. Meghan reportedly accepted that their next chapter could not survive on royal conflict alone. Harry accepted something equally painful: escaping the monarchy had never erased his history. California had once been their escape route. Now, leaving it might be their only chance to protect their marriage, their family, their public relevance, and their fragile connection to the crown. And as the first private arrangements allegedly begin, one question remains unanswered. Are Harry and Meghan truly escaping a collapsing Hollywood dream, or moving toward a royal confrontation far more dangerous than the life they are leaving behind?